Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. They call it the Ring of Fire. All around the Pacific Ocean, the plates, the tectonic plates are loose, and you've got the Pacific plate, the North American plate, and there's a representation of it, and it goes all the way from New Zealand around to Santiago in Chile, all around the Pacific. And this is where earthquakes take place. So over the weekend, they burst out in Japan and also in Ecuador, all the way in South America. So that means that those plates are starting to move, and this will not be the end of it. But the death toll in Ecuador is above 270, and it could go much higher.
Thousands of people were injured in the quakes, and tens of thousands had to be evacuated as buildings were flattened. Rescuers are still trying to dig survivors out of the rubble. Dale Hurd has the story.
In Ecuador Sunday, Christians prayed for the victims of this nation's worst earthquake in decades. Amid the rubble, the desperate search for survivors continued. Time is running out to reach survivors still trapped. My little nephew was inside, this woman cries, as rescuers nearby pull bodies from the collapsed homes, businesses, and here a hospital in ruins. The powerful 7.8 quake struck Saturday night 110 miles west of Quito, the country's capital. The biggest tragedy in the last 67 years, says Ecuador's president. CBN News correspondent Chuck Holton is in Puerto Viejo, just one town away from the epicenter.
I'm at the City Hall, and it's one of the few places that has electricity. They are treating wounded here in front of me. People are still streaming in from around the city, and there are probably 1,000 people camped out on the lawn around the City Hall here because it's one of the few places that they can get water and food and medical attention and security.
The death toll this morning was above 270 and rising, but there have been some miracles. Here, police reached a young girl beneath the piles of crumbled concrete. This rescuer explains the woman they're trying to save is stuck from the waist down. 4,000 miles across the Pacific on the other side of the Ring of Fire in Japan, twin earthquakes killed at least 40. 1,100 were injured in the region near Kumamoto City late Thursday and early Sunday. Collapsed roads and bridges, slowing the effort to reach victims desperate for food, water, and medicine. This father is worried about not having medicine for his daughter, who has been ill. The U.S. military is now assisting Japanese forces, and Operation Blessing is helping in both countries. In Japan, with generators, water, and food. Obi is working closely with Kumamoto Harvest Church and Pastor Koji Nakamura, whose church is in the city center close to the epicenter. And in Ecuador, Obi is setting up kitchens to serve meals to victims. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
As I say, ladies and gentlemen, once those plates start to move, these will not be the end of it. These couple will just be the beginning. And I think we could probably see something in Indonesia. We may see something in Alaska. But that Ring of Fire, as those plates begin to move, there'll be many other earthquakes. It's a shame that you can predict it, but it's tragedy. But we're there to help. Operation Blessing is setting up portable chlorine generators to make fresh drinking water. They've got field kitchens set up so we can feed the people, bring them blankets and other supplies that are crucially needed right now, because these last few days after a tragedy of this kind is when the greatest damage is and the greatest tragedy. So we want to be there, and we are in both places. If you want to help, it's Operation Blessing, CBN, the Disaster Relief Fund, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, and we're there in your name. Terry, it's a shame that, I mean, that's just the way the earth is. It's not anything unusual, but, you know, our continents are connected with various plates. I mean, we have the same thing in California. We have the North American plate with the Pacific plate, and they come together. And, you know, when they separate, it just takes a few feet of separation to bring tragedy.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. They don't last very long, but the damage is horrific. And then when you see a hospital wiped out, you think that's probably the one place people could have gone for help.
Yeah, but anyhow, we're there for them. Well, in other news, President Obama's controversial executive actions on immigration are going before the Supreme Court today. 4-4, by the way. Who knows how it's going to come out? John Jessup has that story.
Thanks, Pat. The justices are weighing whether the president's move to protect 4 million illegal immigrants from deportation and allow them to work in the United States is unconstitutional. Texas is leading 26 states, dominated by Republicans, that have challenged the president's actions. The states and congressional Republicans argue that President Obama doesn't have the power to effectively change immigration law by himself. The court is expected to decide by late June. If the justices split 4-4, Pat, the issue could remain in limbo through the end of the Obama presidency.
What he's trying to do is just clear. He knows that this socialist agenda that he has been advocating is coming to an end. So he wants to ensure that as many of his initiatives get put into place before his Republican opponents have a chance to take them away. And something in Washington that gets fixed in place, they hire people, the laws get set, and then it's awfully hard to take them away. So the president knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't have any congressional mandate. He has no constitutional mandate to do what he's doing, but he's doing it anyhow. But we're talking about millions and millions of people being kept in this country illegal, many of them illegally, many of them being added to the voter rolls. Some are getting driver's licenses. Some are taking welfares. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and the burden on this country is enormous. But he doesn't care, because what this will do is shift the balance, and most of these new immigrants from South America particularly will be counted on to vote Democrat. And that's what these people want. So they want to load the voter rolls with people who perhaps don't speak very good English, but yet can be talked into voting for the candidates that this party wants. So that's the game, and it's not exactly a game that can change the landscape of America very profoundly. John?
Pat, opponents of the new bathroom law in North Carolina are vowing to pressure state lawmakers to repeal the measure, which requires transgender people to use bathrooms that align with their gender at birth. Heather Sells brings us this report on the reactions from conservatives, liberals, and the faith community.
This is not going to slow down. This is not going to go away.
LGBT activists, many corporations, and celebrities are pressuring North Carolina to pull the plug on its new bathroom law, and conservatives are fighting back.
Bruce Springsteen can write a song about being born in the USA, but we're here to tell you the USA is watching North Carolina, and we don't need Bruce Springsteen to come here and tell us how to operate our country.
The fireworks started early this year when Charlotte City Council passed a bathroom ordinance. It allowed people to use the facility of their choice with no religious exemption. It was a double whammy for churches and Christian schools. Pastor Mike Ross oversees both.
Because this ordinance would have made churches and schools comply with these things, and therefore make churches and schools do things that they felt not only were unsafe but unethical. The
Republican-controlled state legislature saw the move as overreach. Last month, it overturned the ordinance with a bill known as HB 2. The new state policy: in university and government bathrooms, people must use the facility that corresponds with their sex at birth.
The bill is simply about protecting the safety, the privacy, and the welfare of women, children, and citizens in North Carolina.
Many in Charlotte's faith community support the new law. In addition to the moral question, they believe the original ordinance could have opened the door to predators posing as transgender people.
It was going to allow individuals to choose whichever bathroom they wanted to use based on how they felt. And just expressing that I'm feeling like a woman today would certainly give a free pass to a man who may have less than positive motives in mind.
We don't want anyone to, lose jobs. We don't want anyone to go without service. But what we felt like was that we needed to maintain the standard and the morals of our city.
Not all believers in North Carolina have the same view of this law. Here at Park Road Baptist in Charlotte, many people oppose it.
there's no correlation that shows an ordinance like that increases predation of children. So I think we need to base our laws not on emotional opinions, but on facts.
In recent years, some predators have posed as transgender, but those cases are infrequent. Michael Shannon is a transgender man. In his former life, he worked as a woman in law enforcement and understands the safety concern. But he says the new law will raise other safety issues.
My presentation as male positions me to go into the male restroom. But if I have to go into the restroom of my biological gender, I have a problem now, because now I'm in the female restroom with this male presentation.
Shannon can't change the gender on his birth certificate. His state doesn't allow it. And he worries that the hassles around HB2 will lead to further isolation of transgender people.
So you end up staying home where you would normally go out. You end up maybe not socializing as much. Those kinds of things for a trans person in particular incite depression.
Pastor Dean hopes Christians on both sides of the debate will moderate what can be offensive language. He and other pastors say the church would do well to reach out to transgender people.
I would like to see the church be more compassionate in its approach, more accepting of all people.
So beyond just the bathroom, beyond just the non-discrimination, all of those things, how do we love people for where they are and help them see what God wants them to become?
In the midst of a bitter debate, it's perhaps something that both sides can agree on. Reporting in Charlotte, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Pat, it has become quite a bitter debate.
I am simply appalled. And ladies and gentlemen, you've got all this outrage on these people. A lot of them, think they're a woman trapped in a man's body, and then 10 years later they say, well, I made a mistake. Yeah, sure. Okay. But in Saudi Arabia, they're going to execute maybe as many as 100 homosexuals. They will be executed because they're practicing homosexuals. Why don't the Bruce Springsteens of this world and these others go out and begin an outrage against Saudi Arabia instead of Charlotte, North Carolina? But I think it's just perfectly reasonable to say, look, we don't want men going into women's bathrooms. We don't want predators going out where little girls are. We don't want voyeurs having free access to the women's locker rooms during games when they're changing clothes. We just don't want that. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. And why people are in such outrage about this whole thing, we haven't heard much about this transgender stuff until about the last 5 years or so. And I said on this program several years ago, if somebody, honest to goodness, feels that she is a woman trapped in a man's body, then she has a perfect right to take hormones and to have surgery and to change to what she really feels, and think of somewhere along the way there was a biological mistake. But people like that are relatively rare. So much of this other stuff is put up, it's put on, and it's just a fraud. And it's one more opportunity for the left to demonstrate against some aggrievement they claim to have that doesn't exist. This is a phony cause to get involved in. And, well, I've got to look after the transgenders. This is nonsense. I believe, as I say, there's no sin if somebody has some kind of hormones going for male and some kind of body part goes for female, and somewhere along the way the person has got to decide which gender they are. There's nothing wrong with that, no problem. But to make a cause célèbre and tear a city apart and boycott cities and all the rest of it because they want to protect the dignity of their own people is just absurd. John?
Pat, the price of oil dropped sharply today after major oil-producing nations couldn't come to an agreement this weekend on limiting the amount of oil they're going to produce. One analyst told the Wall Street Journal the failure was, quote, an extremely bearish scenario for oil prices. He said they could fall as low as $30 a barrel within days. That would be good news at the pump, But Pat, what's your take on this?
Well, my take that it's destroying an industry if we don't stop this. This is the Saudis. The Saudis decided they were going to destroy the shale drillers in America, the so-called fracking group, because America has become the leading producer of crude oil in the world. And the Saudis wanted to stop the competition. Well, what they've done is destroy their own economy. Their rating has gone from AAA to AA, and in the Moody's ratings and others. And those lesser countries, I should say, the smaller producers, are suffering. It is hitting very hard. It's bankrupting Venezuela. It is crippling Russian economy, and others are hurting. But in Doha, they couldn't get together because the Saudis say, look, if they're all in, we're in. If we're not in, we're going to go our own separate way. Well, they have enough to flood the market, and that's what's happening. So you say, well, I can get gas a few cents cheaper, sure. But there are a lot of people going to be able to work, a tremendous amount of investments, billions of dollars on the stock market going down the tubes. And it's brought about by one little country that is deciding they want to stick it to us. That's what it amounts to. That's the bottom line. And so we ought to recognize it and say, well, I can get gas 5 cents cheaper. That's not what's happening. A major segment of the American economy is in jeopardy because of the actions of the Saudis and a few other oil producers.